Welcome, Tim, and thank you so much for coming on.
Man, it's an honor to be on your show. Thank you for inviting me.
Cool. So let's dive right into it. What is the free thinking argument? What are its premises, and why should we think that they are true?
Yeah, well, it shouldn't take too long to explain and defend the free thinking argument. But before I do that, I think it's vital that we define an important term here, and that's libertarian freedom. That's also called libertarian free will, or simply libertarianism. So first, if you don't mind, let me start with a technical version or a definition of libertarianism. And that is often expressed this way, that libertarianism is the view that, one, free will is incompatible with determinism, and two, that some of our actions or thoughts are free. Now, some maintain that an agent is free in a libertarian sense only if they possess the freedom to think or act otherwise. However, all seem to agree that if the agent is not the source of their thought or action, even if they can't think or act otherwise, then they're still free in the libertarian sense. So we can distinguish between two different kinds of libertarian freedom here, but they're both libertarian freedom. So the first is what we call the principle of alternative possibilities. We abbreviate that as the PAP, the PAP. And that's just a fancy way of saying the ability to think or act otherwise. Okay, that's the PAP. But then there's the sourcehood version of libertarian freedom. And so that means even if one doesn't have the ability to think or act otherwise for some weird reason, as long as they're not causally determined to think or act exactly how they think or act, that they're the source, well, then they've still got libertarian freedom. So the PAP is sufficient for libertarian freedom, right? If I can show that somebody's got the ability to do or think otherwise at a certain moment, then I've demonstrated they've got libertarian freedom. But suppose I can't do that, but I can demonstrate that you're not causally determined, right? There's no strings attached in thought or action at some moment. Well, then I've still demonstrated your libertarian freedom. But with all of that said, I typically defend a specific definition of libertarian freedom whenever possible, whenever I can. And if I can't do it, then I simply go to sourcehood versions. But this is the version I like to defend if possible, and that's this. The libertarian freedom is sometimes at least the ability to choose between or among a range of alternative options, each of which is compatible with one's nature at a given moment. So, with the concept of libertarian freedom defined and clarified, now we can dig into the free thinking argument. So let's begin by looking at the argument's origin, right? I developed this at Biola University, where you're at right now, in Dr. Scott Smith's classroom. And so anyway, I specifically remember these thoughts coming into my head. He was kind of talking about something else. It was related, but then the gears started going in my head. And I remember writing it down in my notebook, and I brought it to him later, and we started thinking this through. So this is the first three steps, the first two premises, one conclusion I wrote down. And it's this. One, if humans are not free in the libertarian sense, they cannot rationally infer and rationally affirm claims of knowledge. Two, humans can rationally infer and rationally affirm claims of knowledge. Three, therefore, humans are free in the libertarian sense. So then I brought it up to Dr. Smith, and we started talking about it. And then I expanded it not too long afterwards. And I added two additional premises, which simultaneously added two deductive conclusions and then one abductive conclusion. Now, the wording of the core, you'll find what I just expressed is included here. So here's let's start with two new premises. So one, in the new argument, this is what I call the free thinking argument against naturalism. So one says, if naturalism is true, human nature does not include an immaterial soul. Two, if human nature does not include an immaterial soul, then humans do not possess libertarian freedom. Three, if humans do not possess libertarian freedom, then humans do not possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. Four, humans do possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. Five, therefore humans possess libertarian freedom. Six, therefore human nature includes an immaterial or a supernatural soul. And 7, therefore, naturalism is false. And 8, here's the abductive conclusion, the best explanation of the soul and human libertarian freedom is the biblical view of God. Now, I typically defend each premise in the following manner, and I can do it pretty quickly. Basically, premise 1 is synonymous with, if naturalism is true, nature is all that exists, right? That's pretty straightforward and true by definition. Premise 2 is tantamount to, if all that exists is nature, then all that exists, especially everything about humanity, is causally determined by the laws of nature, the initial conditions of the Big Bang, quantum mechanics, and things outside of human control. Now, premise 3 communicates the fact that if something outside of human control causally determines you to affirm a false belief, then it would be impossible for you to infer or affirm a better or true belief. So think about that. If our thoughts and beliefs are forced upon us, and we could not have chosen better thoughts or better beliefs, then we're simply left assuming that our determined thoughts and beliefs are good, let alone that our beliefs are true. So therefore, we could never rationally affirm that our beliefs really are the inference to the best explanation. You can only assume it, but then think about this. Then that assumption that you're doing, this question-begging assumption of yours, is not really yours. It was causally determined by something other than you. It's simply out of your control. So regarding this issue, William Lane Craig and J.P. Moreland wrote in Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview. They said, quote, if one is to have justified beliefs, then one must be free to obey or disobey epistemic rules. So note that range of options, a range of alternative options, each compatible with your nature, right? You've got to be free to either obey or to do otherwise or disobey epistemic rules. Otherwise, they say, quote, one could not be held responsible for his intellectual behavior, end quote. Now, here's the significant problem for the atheist, or at least the naturalist, which most atheists, at least in the West, are naturalists. Most atheists you're going to find on college campuses are naturalists. So it follows then that if naturalism is true, then atheists, or anybody else for that matter, cannot possess justification for their beliefs. Now, that's a problem if justification is required for knowledge. And that's typically at least thought to be minimally required for knowledge according to most epistemologists. Now, one can happen to have true beliefs. However, if they do not possess justification for a specific belief, at least according to most epistemologists, then their belief does not qualify as a knowledge claim. Now, an epistemologist, you're studying epistemology right now, so this isn't new to you, but epistemology is just a study of knowledge and how we gain knowledge. It's a branch of philosophy. It's a very important branch of philosophy, both metaphysics and epistemology. I think they go hand in hand, but they're vital here. And so this argument really gets into both metaphysics and epistemology. But with everything that I've said so far, here's the deal. If one cannot freely infer the best explanation, then one has no justification that their belief really is the best explanation. So without justification for a belief, any claim of knowledge regarding said belief goes down the drain or out the window. All we're left with is question-begging assumptions. That's a logical fallacy, and that's also determined by something other than you. But obviously, humans possess the ability to rationally affirm claims of knowledge, right? I mean, to argue against that, to argue against that premise is to affirm it. It's self-defeating to argue against it. So if somebody's going to say, no, we do not have the ability to rationally affirm knowledge claims, well, what are you doing there? And plus, why should anybody listen to you if you're going to say you don't have that ability? So if one rejects this ability to rationally affirm knowledge claims, they've just, everything's blown up in their face. Nobody should listen to them. And they've also affirmed what they're trying to dispute. Therefore, let's just say it like this: libertarian freedom in the soul, or some some immaterial or supernatural, other than nature aspect of humanity exists. And therefore, if that's the case, naturalism is false. So, yeah, I mean, we can deductively conclude that we've got libertarian freedom, and therefore that there's something other than nature about humanity. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So if I understand you correctly, you're basically saying it could be against the assumption of naturalism that we happen to acquire true beliefs, but because there is no guarantee, given naturalism and given that our thoughts would be, caused by the laws of physics, which are not aimed at truth, that because there is no such guarantee, no thought can be counted as knowledge because there is no justification in that.
That's right. That's right. This argument does not say that if atheistic naturalism is true, then humans can never have true beliefs. This argument is straw man attacked by attacking a straw man so often, because they're saying you're saying that I can't have true beliefs. No, that's not what I'm saying. You said it perfectly. Our belief forming faculties would not be aimed at truth. Now, my argument is very similar to Alvin Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism, where Plantinga shows that if one affirms evolution and naturalism, then that means that God does not exist and that we were not created or intelligently designed with cognitive faculties aimed at true beliefs, right? So if one affirms both evolution and naturalism, then our belief-forming faculties are not aimed at truth; they're aimed at survival, which could form some true beliefs, especially when it comes to tiger avoidance or crossing the street, things like that. But why should you trust them at all when it comes to metaphysical or theological beliefs? So they're not aimed at truth, even though you could form some true beliefs. But it undercuts, it provides a defeater to the claim that free will doesn't exist, or that naturalism is true, and all that. So it provides a defeater. Now, I think the free-thinking argument against naturalism, as opposed to the evolutionary argument against naturalism, I mean, look, hear me closely. I love the evolutionary argument against naturalism. I think my argument, the free-thinking argument against naturalism, goes a little deeper, because it shows that on naturalism, ultimately every thought and belief isn't even aimed at survival. It's aimed at physics and chemistry, fizzing and popping, or quantum mechanics, moving randomly. These things aren't aimed at truth, at least if your beliefs are aimed at survival, it seems that if one holds mostly true beliefs, they'll probably survive better. But again, who cares about metaphysics or theology? That seems to just apply to the physical world. But man, on strict naturalistic determinism, if physics and chemistry is running the show, that's not aimed at truth or survival or anything else. It's just physics and chemistry fizzing and popping and doing its thing. That's not reliable at all. So I think that's very problematic. Okay. Now, like related to that, just want to pick up on premise 3, where you say that if humans do not possess libertarian freedom, then they don't have the ability to rationally infer knowledge or make knowledge claims. Now, why that link there, that kind of link of necessity between libertarian free will and the ability to make knowledge claims? Well, I like to explain that and answer that question with a thought experiment. So I find that sometimes it's hard for people to wrap their minds around some of these more abstract concepts. But as soon as you bring in a thought experiment with a mad scientist, things start to come into, things are clarified. Okay. So, so suppose somehow a mad scientist secretly, I don't know how he did it, but he's got the means. He secretly implanted some electrodes and some microchips in your head while you were sleeping somehow. And so play along with me. So now he's got exhaustive control over your mind, and now he causally determines all of your thoughts and beliefs all the time. All right, exhaustively. So this includes exactly what you think of and about, and exactly how you think of and about it. Now, that how is vital. Think about that. He's not just causing and determining exactly what you think of and about, but now he's forcing upon you how you think about these things, right? Your judgments, your evaluations, your weighing of these things, as it were. So now all of your thoughts about your beliefs and all of your beliefs about your thoughts are caused and determined by the mad scientist. This also includes the words that are being formed in your head right now that you feel like you're trying to evaluate what I'm talking about. Well, guess what? All of those evaluations are now causally determined not by you. You've got nothing to do with it. You're a passive cog in the system. It's the mad scientist that is causally determining how you're thinking about this thought experiment right now. So this includes the next words that are formed in your head and the next words that are going to come out of your mouth. With that in mind, I've got a question. How can you, not the mad scientist, rationally affirm the current beliefs in your head as good, bad, better, the best, true, probably false, whatever? Note the range of options, the range of alternative options from which to choose, right? How can you rationally affirm the current beliefs in your head as good, bad, better, the best, true, false, whatever, without begging the question? Good luck with that. Yeah. It's impossible. You can't do it. It's metaphysically impossible, right? So now, here's the deal. If that makes sense with a mad scientist, now replace the mad scientist with physics and chemistry. You got the exact same problem, but for different reasons. Now, here's something even, look, we got to be fair. And if I'm going to attack atheists, I've also got to attack some Christians or other theists, right? Replace the mad scientist with God or anything else for that matter, and one has the exact same rationality problems, but for different reasons. It doesn't matter what you replace, take the mad scientist out, put in anything else, fill in that blank with anything else. You've got the exact same problems, but for different reasons. But
so you're Tim. So you're basically saying that the Calvinist is in the same boat as the naturalist, like because he believes that God has determined everything, like he cannot actually make any rational claims to knowledge.
That's exactly right. If the Calvinist affirms exhaustive divine determinism, EDD. Yeah. So now many Calvinists today do that. Guillaume Bignon is probably one of the. He's a great guy, a Christian philosopher, a Calvinist philosopher from France. He and I go back and forth on some of these issues. He wrote a book, and part of my book, I recently wrote a book called Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge, and Mere Molinism, and a lot of this book is focused on his book. And so I try to show, just correct a few things here. But he affirms exhaustive divine determinism. And so Paul Helm affirms exhaustive divine determinism. A lot of people see him as the leading Calvinistic philosopher in the world today. A guy with the last name Hart, I can't think of his name. I quote him in my book. Matthew J. Hart is his name. He affirms it. Then you look at other theologians like John Piper affirms it. James White affirms it. So this is, I would say, the common view. And I would say that Calvin, and I write about this in my book, have a whole chapter devoted to Calvin and Luther and Philip Melanchthon and the Reformation. The Reformers didn't even think this stuff. Nobody really started thinking this about exhaustive divine determinism until Jonathan Edwards. And so Edwards is really the culprit, really the problem here, who has influenced, which is funny, Edwards and Ed, right? Exhaustive divine determinism, that's how you can remember it. But it's really a Edwardsian view, or so it seems to me. But it's just as problematic for the Calvinist who affirms Ed. Now, there are Calvinists like Greg Koukl. You're familiar with Greg, right? Great guy. He's a 5-point tulip Calvinist. He and I have talked about these matters quite a bit over the last 2 or 3 years. In fact, we went to Israel together a year ago. And now he's a 5-point Calvinist. He's not going to give that up. But he agrees Ed is false. And we've got to have the libertarian freedom to think if we're going to be held rationally responsible. So he believes that we do have libertarian freedom, just not in issues pertaining to salvation or soteriological matters. So, and in my book, I show how you can be a 5-point Calvinist and a mere Molinist simultaneously. So, kind of went on a rabbit trail there, but there you go.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it boils down to basically affirming that, you know, if you want to make any knowledge claim, you have to affirm rationality and the independence of rationality as, I mean, call it a deep feature or an irreducible feature of reality. Is that about right?
Yes, and I think that this is what separates us from animals.
Yeah,
right? Animals know some things. They possess some knowledge. When I feed my dog, he knows there's food in front of him. You know, when he sees a cat or a squirrel outside, he knows to bark at it. He wants, you know, you know, arguably he knows that. I would grant that. Some would say, no, he doesn't know. He's just reacting. Well, all right, whatever. He seems to possess some knowledge. And I think humans have some of that as well. But there's something deeper about humanity. As Aristotle would say, we're rational animals. And so I'm really focused on what separates us from the rest of the pack, so to speak.
Okay, cool. Just want to go back to, again, free thinking and rationality. I mean, some people may claim, and I mean, it's actually often heard that, you know, computers, like they're not free, and yet they spit out knowledge that happens to be true. So why that link between free thinking and true belief or like proper knowledge?
Yeah, so I refer to this as the computer objection, and people will say, well, look, computers, they're so rational, and they possess all this knowledge, right? They're smarter than humans, but they don't have free will. And so, the first thing I do then is I start with the mad scientist thought experiment again. So I think that mad scientist thought experiment can answer that, right? Yeah. If the computer does not have free will, if everything about it is ultimately causally determined by something or someone else other than the computer, then the computer is at an epistemic loss. It's a passive cog in the system, designed by something or someone else, right? But it could trick humans. It can trick ignorant humans. So with that said, let's talk about the difference between knowledge and calculation. So people ask me quite a bit, do computers require free will to make accurate calculations? No. They don't require free will for that. But calculation is not the same as inference to the best explanation, or what I refer to as the process of rational deliberation. So this is clear to anybody who really thinks about the nature of computation or calculation. So does a computer or a calculator think about or of? Yeah, does a computer or calculator think of or about what's shown on the screen, for example? Of course not. It doesn't. And to make that point crystal clear, consider the words of the eminent philosopher of mind, and an atheist, by the way. So look, he doesn't have any theological access to grind here. But this is from John Searle. And I point people to John Searle's thought experiment called The Chinese Room. Mm-hmm. On my website, freethinkingministries.com, I have an article called Free Thinking in a Chinese Room. People want to start with that, and they got some links. They could go to some other places to learn more about it. And I also would encourage people to go to my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search freethinkingministries.com, and you can find more about these things there. In fact, I just had a conversation with Clay Jones about computers and if they're really intelligent or not. But anyway, this is what John Searle, the atheist philosopher of mind, has to say. And he says, quote, computation has no intrinsic intentionality, but only secondary intentionality imparted by the programmers. Computation is not thinking. Computation is a mechanical process and nothing more, end quote. Now, according to Searle, a computer only appears rational only if a rational agent designed it and programmed it to work according to basic rules and a design plan. Now, if the computer then functions properly, ignorant humans who don't know what's going on can be fooled. They can be deceived. So really, when one says, look, a computer is rational, well, that just shows their ignorance. They're being fooled. As one computer scientist once told me, he said, Tim, a computer is just as rational as a power drill. Power drills aren't rational, right? So now with that in mind, let me reference another atheist who laser focuses on these issues in his study. This is from a philosopher from Duke University named Alex Rosenberg. He's also considered to be one of the most influential atheists in the world today. And he wrote a book. I actually encourage everybody to read this book. It's called The Atheist's Guide to Reality. I read that book and my faith was strengthened after reading that book. But in his book called An Atheist's Guide to Reality, Rosenberg writes, quote, the internal working of your laptop can't really be about anything at all, end quote, right? It's not of or about anything. This is what we refer to as intentionality or intentional states of consciousness. Your computer does not possess intentional states of consciousness, but it might fool you. So if you're thinking about, right, if there's no aboutness, if there's no thinking of or about anything, that means there's no ofness or aboutness regarding your computer or anything like computers. So if you are thinking about the free thinking argument, and a computer or calculator cannot really be about anything at all, according to Rosenberg and Searle, then there is a big difference between you and your computer. There's a big difference. So the process of rationally inferring reason-based propositional knowledge requires both intentionality and libertarian freedom. So animals, I think, do possess intentionality, but they don't. I don't think they possess libertarian freedom. I ask my dog all the time if he's got free will. I ask him if he's got a soul. He's never given me a clear answer yet, so I can only speculate. But most don't think they've got free will. I would say that most people would say that, even if they do possess intentionality. But computers don't have intentionality, and without intentionality, one could never possess the volitional ability to choose between competing hypotheses as to which one ought to be preferred. Now, why is that? Because if one cannot think of or about these competing hypotheses, then one cannot freely or rationally choose between these competing hypotheses. If there is no intentionality or free will, then there is no free thinking about anything. Now, again, getting back to my dog, I don't think he thinks of or about competing hypotheses or what the best explanation is. That's a different kind of thing that humans do. But yeah, you got to have intentionality, and computers don't have that. So the computer objection, they're already saying, well, the computers don't have free will. Okay, then mad scientist thought experiment applies to that. But moreover, there's no intentionality when it comes to strictly mechanical things, and even atheists agree. The atheist philosophers who specialize on this topic. So that's where I'd start with that. Okay,
sounds great. Okay, so guys, before we get to the last question, I just want to mention again, as Tim just did, check out his website, freethinkingministries.com. Is that right, Tim?
Yeah, freethinkingministries.com.
And the YouTube channel, Free Thinking Ministries as well. So check that out. The link is in the description below. So go over there, check out his content and subscribe. So Tim, our last question, that's a really interesting one. Your argument concludes that the best explanation of libertarian freedom is not just theism in general, but the biblical version of theism or of God. Yeah. Now, how do you get there?
I'll try to keep this short. This could be another entire dissertation, but I don't claim that Christian theism or a biblical Christianity must be, right? It's not a deductive conclusion. This is an abductive conclusion. So I state that it's the best explanation, that the biblical view of God or Christian theism is the best explanation of the soul, the immaterial, other than nature soul, and human libertarian freedom. I think it's the biblical view of God. Now, I often start by providing the Kalam cosmological argument. and then show that the rational inferences from the deductive conclusion of the Kalam line up perfectly with the way the Bible describes God. So I won't go through all of that right now. It's a lot of fun to go through that and connect those dots. But people can find that on the platforms you've just mentioned. So I start with the Kalam and show that the rational inferences line up perfectly with the way the Bible describes God. Or I can just do this too. I can simply start with the biblical data without the Kalam, right? But I love the Kalam, so I like to start with it. But one's free to just start with the biblical data about what God is like and how humans are created then in the image or likeness of God. So that is to say that the human soul fits quite nicely within a theistic worldview. But I've not simply argued for God. Rather, I've suggested that the biblical view of God is the inference to the best explanation of the existence of human freedom and the human other than nature soul. And this is because the biblical view of both God and soul are clear. So consider both the Old and New Testaments. I'll just give one from each. Genesis 1:26 and 27 says, quote, "Let us make man in our image," right? End quote. Male and female, God created us in his image. All right. Now, it's often translated as likeness instead of image. So, again, we go to the Kalam and we can see that God, the creator of the universe, is an immaterial thinking thing with free will, by the way. And so now, if God is an immaterial, free thinking thing, can God create humans, the soul, an immaterial, free thinking thing in his image? Right now, not everything about me is immaterial, obviously, but is there an immaterial, other than nature aspect of my existence that can be a free thinking thing in God's likeness? I argue yes. Now, 2 Corinthians 5:8 says, quote, did I already say that one? 2 Corinthians 5:8? No. Okay. That says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, right? So now if there's something about me that can be apart from my body, if my body can be destroyed, but I can still be present with the Lord, then there's something about me that is not my body. And so that's the soul. That's what I'm talking about here. That seems to jive with everything that I've argued for with the free thinking argument. So again, with the Kalam in mind, not to mention Bible verses like God is spirit, right? We know that God is not composed of anything physical. And so it follows that God is not the kind of thing that photons would bounce off of to then penetrate the retina to stimulate the optic nerve to provide an image in our brains, right? God's not that kind of thing. No, this could not be what the author had in mind when he spoke of humanity being created in the image of God in the first chapter of Genesis. This image is better described as a likeness. So God is an immaterial and supernatural mind, and so is the human soul. I think that is the best explanation there. So, and moreover, in 2 Corinthians, Paul, let me just reiterate this. When Paul tells us that we can exist apart from the body, this is, based on the logical law of identity. J.P. Moreland gets into this. I recommend his book called The Soul. But based on the logical law of identity, if a person can exist apart from his body, then he is not identical with his body. And so Paul is referring to you, an immaterial human mind that has a body but can continue to exist apart from it. So again, this immaterial mind is the human soul created in the image of God. So given the fact that we have both argued, one, that immaterial minds exist in the universe, and that two, given the Kalam, we have evidence of a mega mind behind the universe, and we can do that without touching a Bible. Then I say, well, perhaps we should take the Bible seriously because it affirms the exact same thing. When I get to the Kalam, I say, look, we can reach these conclusions that the creator of the universe is an immaterial, other than nature mind with free will, if we can conclude that simply by thinking logically about scientific data without touching a Bible, then maybe we should take the Bible seriously because it affirms the exact same thing. So anyway, this is why I think the biblical view of God is the best explanation for the immaterial or other than nature human soul. So there you go.
Cool. I've got two last questions, more personal ones. How, do you get more pushback or engagement from fellow Christians or from atheists, with regards to the free thinking argument? What's your experience?
Well, that's a great question. So when I was at Biola, I was laser focused at, okay, let's take down atheistic naturalism. And so I was really focused on going after the atheist who affirms naturalism.
Yeah.
But to my surprise, I'll even say this, as I started my Ph.D. work, I got my Ph.D. in theology, in systematic theology, but I started in the philosophy department because I was going to go after atheism. But I was being hammered by fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, right? By Calvinists who were like, no, one of the deductive conclusions of the free thinking argument is therefore humans possess libertarian freedom. Yeah. And they're like, no, we don't.
Yeah.
No, we don't. Calvinism's true. Exhaustive divine determinism. I'm like, wait a second. And so I was being hammered by fellow Christians when I'm trying to go after atheists here.
Okay.
And so I said, okay, hold on, atheists. I've got to fight my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ for a while. And so I actually moved to the theology department then, which is a reformed theology department, by the way, to argue against this crazy theological view. And on top of that, I would say I still get pushback from atheists, but in my book I note that there's more and more atheists, including John Searle, who I referenced earlier. He would not go after the free thinking argument by attacking that third premise, by saying that if we don't have libertarian freedom, then we cannot rationally infer or rationally affirm claims of knowledge. He would agree with it. He would probably go after premise 2. And so I think the argument passes. I think each premise is strong. But if I were to attack it, and I've attacked it myself over and over, I find if there's a weak link of the extremely strong premises, the weakest link would be premise 2, I think. Or I've also seen many atheists affirm the whole thing and then reject the abductive conclusion and say, no, that's not the best explanation. But you'll find different people. I think mostly internet atheists will go after the third premise. But really, when I talk to philosophers, most of them wind up accepting the third premise and realizing, yeah, we got to have the libertarian freedom to think if we're going to be rational. But, they disagree with each other. The atheists are disagreeing with each other on that. And so I kind of sit back and let them fight it out. But yeah, as of right now, I am dealing mostly with fellow Christians who want to reject the idea of libertarian free will. And I also, in this book, spend so much time looking at the biblical data. I have this entire second chapter is all based on biblical data. I got tired of people saying, oh, Molinists, you don't base your theology on the Bible. You base it on philosophy. And I said, all right, we're going to start with Scripture. And so that's what I did.
Okay, cool. One last question. Do you talk about this stuff with your wife over dinner?
I've tried. I'm like, hey, let me run this by. And she's like, nope, we're done. No more. So occasionally she'll let me or ask me some questions, but we don't have a lot of conversation. But I'm so thankful for my wife.
Sure.
She's helped me a lot as I've processed through some of these things. She doesn't even pretend to be a philosopher or a systematic theologian or anything like that. But there's times, as I was working on this dissertation and this book, where, I remember a couple times I was in the shower and some thoughts were coming to me, and I'm like, oh, I got to get these. I'm like, honey, and she's like, what? I'm like, write this down. Or other times we were driving on long road trips, like to see my son. My son's a wrestler, and so we'd be on these long road trips to watch him wrestle. And I'd be driving, and then these thoughts were occurring to me, like, write this down. And so she's taking all these notes for me. So I couldn't have done it without her. She's a great support.
Cool. Well, I guess if she doesn't want to listen to you, you at least have your dog. He doesn't have libertarian free will, but he can listen to you.
Yeah, he basically, I even said this in the acknowledgments, my dog sat by me through almost every word that I typed in this thing. So I thanked him for his company.
That's cool. Thanks so much, Tim, for coming on. Thanks for all the explanations. That was really helpful. And
Well, I only have one requirement. You got to be on my YouTube show now. So
sure, I'll come on soon as we make the time for it. So guys, again, check out freethinkingministries.com, the YouTube channel. And thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.